Okay, so here we are. Today is the 12th of December, 2024, and this is the final Zoom session around the Grove for this year, apart from the 30th of December. But this is the conclusion of 3 years going around the Grove, looking at different things. So I'm just going to bring up my PowerPoint presentation and talk us through it. Next year, we're not having PowerPoint presentations. It'd be more conversational. So I apologize again that this one isn't as rehearsed as previous ones have been, and I'm throwing together ideas relatively quickly because I've been a bit scatterbrained. So this, like I said, this concludes the 3rd year of going around the Owen Grove. And now on the YouTube channel for the Owen Grove, there's over 100 videos. So it's become quite an archive, a database, if you will. In 2022, we did the basic lore. So if you want the basic lore about the yew tree, which is what we're talking about today, look for yew tree 2022. And in 2023, we did herbalism, apothecary lore. So if you want to see the herbalism of the yew tree, look for the yew tree 2023. And this year, we spent the year looking at which Celtic gods and goddesses best corresponded with each tree. So this is the conclusion of that. We've already looked at 19 trees, pondering which god or goddess corresponds best with each of those trees. And this is the finale. And the main deity we're going to look at, and I'll give logic to it further on, is a goddess called Nemetona. But equally, Nemetona is a title that could correspond with many goddesses. Nemetona simply means she of the sacred grove. So any goddess of a given area would be the main goddess of the grove, sort of thing. We'll look at that further on. So going into the days then, the days of the yew tree, which begin today. Today's a transition from days of aspen into the days of yew. Run from the 21st degree of Sagittarius, which governs the thighs, the lower cauldron, until the 9th degree of Capricorn. And so you have 9 degrees and then another 9 degrees, 9 degrees of Sagittarius, 9 degrees of Capricorn. And the midpoint, the beginning of Capricorn, 0 degrees Capricorn, is the most important moment in the year, if you like. It's the winter solstice. Important for the solar year, because that's the death of the old sun and the rebirth of a new sun, if you like. So it's a very important moment psychologically and in mystery traditions and so on. And to the ancestors, we'll look at that in the Irish lore, the importance of the winter solstice. But, you know, there's the nights getting darker and darker and darker and darker. And then there's that wonderful moment of the winter solstice. And you get what they call 3 days standstill, where nothing seems to change. It's like 3 days of stillness. And then the days are noticeably longer than they were. So the solstice is around the 21st. Some years it can be the 20th. After 3 days standstill, it's going to take you to the 24th or 25th of December, which before Christianity was the birth of a sun god of the Roman Empire called Sol Invictus, 25th of December, and that was passed on to Jesus, of course. So that rebirth And there's an Irish mythology of a god of love born at the winter solstice, which I'll talk about too. So it's an important time of year. And symbolically, death of the old, rebirth, birth of the new is played out in the trees with all of that as well. So lovely patterns that happen with the Ogham. On the left is the sun cross. The sun cross is nothing to do with Christianity. It's to do with 4 stations of the sun in the circle of the year. So you've got the winter solstice, spring equinox, summer solstice, autumn equinox. And that's an equal armed cross dividing the sun's journey around the year, you know, so it's just a circle divided into 4. But the trees for that are the yew tree for the winter solstice, the ash tree for the spring equinox, the apple tree for summer solstice, and the elder tree for the autumn equinox. And they correspond then with, you know, the winter solstice can be nighttime, and the spring equinox can be sunrise, and summer solstice, the full light of day. So there's different ways of working with those trees as poetic magic, sympathy magic, you know. The ash tree is the rising sun, and the spring equinox and light triumphant, if you like. And the winter solstice, the yew tree, is that rebirth moment. You're still in the darkest part of the year, but suddenly the days are just slightly longer, and the sun will make the days grow in length again. That's shown on the right-hand side with aspen is the moment, the period of death before rebirth. And we looked at that in the last session. Now we're at the winter solstice tree, which is the stillness and peace waiting for the rebirth. And then a brand new cycle will begin with the birch tree starting a new cycle of the sun going around the Ogham Grove. And birch has all those new beginning qualities to it. And there's some interesting mythology corresponding with the time of the winter solstice about the rebirth of the light and the kindling of the flame and so on. Throughout the year, each quarter of the Ogham, each one's known as an acma. We're in the final acma, which is on the right-hand side at the bottom. It began with the pine tree after the autumn equinox, and there's a descending into the wild hunt, descending to the wild heath of gorse and heather, psychopomp journey into the sacred realm of the dead with the aspen tree and the stars in the center of the galaxy. And now we're leaving that sacred burial ground and going into the yew tree, you know, the great big tree. At the end of it all, you know, the yew tree, if you like, is the conclusion of the entire Ogham journey. It begins with the birch tree and it concludes with the yew tree. And the yew tree is so important that the oldest yew tree in the British Isles is in Scotland, and it's something like 5,000 or 6,000 years old. You know, no tree lives as long as a yew tree in the British Isles. It is the oldest living tree, and deep in lore, of course. So in this diagram, we've descended down the right-hand side to the 6 o'clock position at the bottom, where there's the yew tree. And then a brand new cycle will begin from birch rising up into the days of summertime. So here's one of the main patterns in the Ogham Grove, and it relates to the winter solstice. If you're not familiar with it, the dark green pentagram is formed by the evergreen trees. And the gold pentagram that it's interlaced with is formed by the trees of the rose family. So there's a kind of yin and yang. The dark green evergreen pentagram is anchored on the winter solstice with the yew tree, and the golden pentagram is anchored on the summer solstice with the apple tree, and they're interlaced like that, interlocked, perfectly balanced, as it were. But here's an interesting thing, and there's a story to make sense of this as well. It's just a wonderful design that's there in the Ogham Grove, not by any contrivance by me, but by the tree list from the Aura Sept in the Book of Ballymote, 1390 AD. All we've done is put the trees in a circle rather than a straight line. So most people are familiar, of course, that if you cut an apple in half, you get a pentagram of seeds in the middle. On the left-hand side is a cut through a yew stem. And the yew tree too has its pentagram in its stems. So it's quite interesting that the two, the yew tree winter solstice and the apple tree summer solstice, both carry the pentagram within their chemistry, within their biology, if you like. So that's rather beautiful. You know, did the ancient people know that? They didn't have microscopes, of course, but the yew tree pentagram and that rose family pentagram, it's part of nature. It's part of the biology of it all. So in Ireland, there is a unique story about the bardic tradition of Ireland, the poets, the Fili. And this is an old story, maybe written down much later, but the story relates to like pre-Christian times. So it relates to about the 3rd century or the 4th century. And I'll cut it very short, but you can look it up. I think the story is called Ballia's Strand or something like that. If I can find it on the internet, I'll put a link in the Facebook group. But basically, it's a kind of Romeo and Juliet story. There's 2 young lovers, and they both, through misadventure, hear that the other had died, and they die of heartache thinking the other had died. So it's a tragic story, but the magic of this story is that Ballia, a young prince from Northern Ireland, he was buried next to Ailinn, the princess of Southern Ireland. So north and south, and the yew tree and the apple tree are north and south of each other, were buried next to each other. Now, here's the magic. From his grave grew a yew tree, and from her grave grew an apple tree. So the yew and the apple, winter solstice, summer solstice, grew out of the graves of these young lovers, and they intertwined. Now, the story is that the poets of Ireland took the wood from the apple tree and the yew tree of these young lovers. And in Northern Ireland, the poets used the wood from the yew tree to write in Ogham records of the marriages of nobility, who was married to who, love relationships, and so on. And the same was done in Southern Ireland with the wood from the apple tree, that the poets recorded the marriages of noble families and so on. So there's a kind of hint towards divine union or love or people, a man and woman coming together. For Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, these records were kept in Ogham writing. Now, the story is that eventually the poets of Northern Ireland and the poets of Southern Ireland brought these wooden shafts with the Ogham inscriptions. They brought them all together at Tara. Tara's in the County Meath. It was the centre of Ireland where the High King would marry the goddess of the land. And when they brought the apple wands and the yew wands together, the pieces of wood flew together and interlocked with each other, like Romeo and Juliet found each other again and just wouldn't be separated, and these pieces of wood could not be separated. They were interlocked forever, and they were kept at the treasure house at the Hill of Tara. It's an amazing story. And the two pentagrams suggest that interlocking of wooden staffs that can't be separated. You know, it's like a complicated weave of the yew tree and the apple tree. An amazing bit of lore, you know. It's interesting that the boy or the young man was the yew tree in the winter solstice, and the female was the apple tree in the summer solstice. There's a lot of lore about the sovereignty goddess in different lands corresponding with apple and the summertime and so on. Like in Southern Ireland, the sovereignty goddess is Anya. She's celebrated at the Feast of St. John after the summer solstice. There's Christian overlays and adaptations with that. So the yew tree being winter solstice, probably the most famous thing in Ireland relating to the summer solstice is Newgrange, you know, the ancient sacred site there. And what's unique at Newgrange is that the sun shines through the main entrance of Newgrange at the winter solstice. So this site that predates the pyramids was deliberately built to receive the winter solstice sunshine into a kind of womb, belly of an earth goddess type idea. And there is a lovely, wonderful story, again, relating to divine union or sacred marriage at Newgrange. This is a card I drew for the Sacred Sites Oracle deck for Newgrange. And it depicts Angus O, the god of love. And the story of Angus O at Newgrange is that the great father god of the Irish gods and goddesses, the Dagda fell in love with the river goddess Bowen, the River Boyne, which is next to Newgrange. But she was married, but she wasn't married to a very loving partner. And the Dagda, when he saw her and wanted to be with her, he froze time. And that's really quite interesting because the harp of the Dagda, his magical harp, keeps the seasons turning. So because of that, he had the ability to freeze time. And he froze time long enough for him and Bowen to make love, and also long enough for her to have a child and give birth. So at least 9 months of their time, he froze time in the real world. So in a blink of an eye, they had been lovers and became the parents of her child. And her child is Angus O, the god of love. So indirectly then, another way of looking at that is at the winter solstice, in a blink of an eye, but for them 9 months of frozen time, at winter solstice, the river goddess gave birth to the god of love. The interesting idea of the rebirth of the sun and the sunlight and Sol Invictus and Jesus at the 25th of December and stuff. So this is kind of like an Irish god of love born at the winter solstice, as it were. And again, a sacred marriage thing on the winter solstice, like with Anya, Bolya and Ailin, the yew and the apple. So this year, we've also been looking at the classical wheel of deities and how they correspond with the zodiac, and then relating it to the trees. So the yew tree crosses from Sagittarius into Capricorn. That takes us from the Dagda's time of year, which was Sagittarius, and which in the classical world was Jupiter and Zeus. So Dagda is the kind of Irish Jupiter or Zeus father god. And then it takes us into the first 9 degrees of Capricorn, which is really interesting because in the classical world, that's the goddess Vesta and the goddess Hestia. Vesta is the Roman and Hestia is the original Greek. And she's the goddess of family and hearth and home, but most importantly and symbolically, the sacred fire. You know, the Vestal Virgins kept the sacred fires burning, just like the sisters of Bridget keeping an eternal flame at Kildare, if you like, that idea of a sacred fire corresponding with the rebirth of the sun. So in any ceremony, religious ceremony in classical Greece or Rome, the very first deity to be acknowledged would be Vesta or Hestia, that there had to be the sacred fire before any ceremony continued. You know, she had to be acknowledged first. And we've looked before, like if you go back and look at the birch tree for 2024, we corresponded the birch tree with the goddess Ellen of the Ways and other sovereignty goddesses. But the goddess Ellen, her name, Ellen, literally means a ray of sunlight. And it leads on to Rowan, sacred to the goddess Bridget and her eternal flame. So it's quite interesting. There's a pattern there of the winter solstice, rebirth of the sun, and then Hestia, Vesta, and the sacred fire, and then Ellen being a ray of sunshine from the winter solstice that ignites Bridget's eternal flame or feeds Bridget's eternal flame. There's a pattern there. Make of it what you will, work with it however you want to work with it. But it's that kind of flames of inspiration born of the winter solstice being passed from one tree to another tree. So, whilst the zodiac deity for the winter solstice is Vesta and Hestia, I'm now focusing on tree lore. And this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. And I am guilty of, you know, this is just how it makes sense to me. So don't take this as a dogma or anything, or a catma. You know, this is me contemplating. And it came about because I was looking at history in the Glastonbury area where I lived. And there's a famous garden there called Chalice Well. And there's yew trees there. So the archaeologists that explored Chalice Well in the 1960s, they found stumps of very ancient yew trees going back to Roman times in Somerset. And the archaeologist himself speculated that yew groves were sacred to the goddess Hecate. So obviously Hecate is a Greek goddess, but I was kind of enwrapped by the idea that yew groves were sacred to Hecate. And then I got to thinking, well, who would be Hecate for the Britons, you know, the Celts of the British Isles? And of course, we have to look through archaeology or Romanized culture. And so the Romans looked at British goddesses and gave them Roman names. For instance, a lot of British goddesses get converted into Minerva. And that's quite important. It's a goddess with an owl. And that goddess with an owl is important to Wales. And another goddess that they related to British Celtic goddesses was the Roman goddess Diana. And that's really important. Diana corresponds with Artemis, corresponds with the woods and the forests, and Diana and Artemis are always depicted with stags and so on. So that, you know, a goddess with stags and deer is important to Brythonic iconography as well. So whilst Hecate is Greek, the Romans saw her and adapted her as Diana Triformis. That's threefold or three forms Diana. It was basically a triple goddess idea, because Hecate was normally depicted as a threefold goddess, and importantly, placed at a crossroads or a three, a road that goes off in three directions. So it might not be meeting of four roads or just three roads, but at a junction is where Hecate was often related to, and that's quite significant. So looking around then, cut it very quickly, I ended up equating Hecate and yew groves with a goddess called Nemetona, she of the sacred grove. And I'll explain some logic to that, but there's some patterns as well. So this is two examples from Roman Britain where the triple goddess, threefold goddess like Diana Triformis or Hecate is common enough in the British Isles under Roman control. Before the Romans, the Celts really didn't make any stone statues that have survived. That they used wood or other things. So we have these Romanized Celtic icons, if you like. But threefold goddesses, triple goddesses is throughout the Celtic mythology. Even King Arthur in Welsh lore had three queens, and each of the three queens was called Guinevere. So I did this a while ago for the yew tree. It's a circle of red arils, the fruits of the yew tree, and a triple spiral in the middle was a way of kind of acknowledging Nemetona, Diana Triformis, the threefold goddess that possibly related to the yew tree. So yew groves were sacred in the classical world to Hecate, and Nemetona means she of the sacred grove, and the yew tree is the conclusion of the Ogham Grove. So these kind of things were falling together. In Italy, there's a famous sanctuary of Diana, and it's called Lake Nemi. And every year there was a big festival to Diana called the Nemeralia or the Nemeralia. And the word Nemi finds its way into Nemeton and Nemeter, which are the sacred groves of the Druids. And the goddess Nemetona is she of the sacred groves, if you like. So it's very tenuous, but it's kind of pointing towards, if you're going to give any deity to the yew tree, it's she of the sacred grove. Now, you have to forgive me, I can't remember their names, but on the left-hand side is Ireland, and there were 5 guardian trees for Ireland. 3 of them were in County Meath. County Meath was the sacred centre of Ireland. It's where the high kings of Ireland would marry the goddess of Ireland, the sovereignty goddess at the centre of Ireland, and I'll come back to that. 2 of the 5 guardian trees were in County Leinster, and they were both yew trees. The other 3 that were in County Meath were all ash trees. That's quite interesting in itself, because the yew trees are the winter solstice and the ash trees are the spring equinox. So there's some interesting patterns there that could relate to divine kingship, or the return of light triumphant over darkness, and all those ideas. But the centre of Ireland, or Ireland itself, in the stories, and this is what I'm apologising for, because off the top of my head, I can't remember the names, but there were 3 goddesses of Ireland that married various people that came in invasions. So they had to marry the threefold goddess of Ireland, to have union with the land, as it were. But those sacred trees of ash and yew were there. Now, we'll come back to Meath as the centre point further on. On the right-hand side is Wales, and in the compilation called the Mabinogion, there's a story called The Dream of Maxen Fledig, and it tells the story of the land of Wales being taken over by the Roman Empire. And the Emperor of Rome comes to Wales in search of the goddess Ellen. And as soon as he sees her, he says, Empress of Rome, implying that he's going to marry her. And they do get married. And the story unfolds. And as part of the wedding gift, she demands that he builds 3 towns for her, 3 Roman towns or cities. And they are Caerleon, Carmarthen, and Caernarvon. On this map, they've got their Roman names. Caerleon is down in the bottom right-hand corner called Isca. And Carmarthen is to the left, it's called Moradunum. And up in the north, Caernarvon is Saguntium. So there were 3 tribal areas, and each had their own town that the goddess Ellen demanded the Roman Empire build. And these towns were joined together by Roman roads, which are still known as San Ellen, Ellen's roads or Ellen's causeways. Now, this next bit isn't in the Mabinogion, but you can check it out for yourself. If you make a triangle of the 3 places, Caerleon, Carmarthen, Caernarvon, and work out geometrically the centre of that triangle, takes you to the heart of Wales, a place called Ellenith. And Ellenith means literally Ellen's land. That's what it means. And there's a river flows from Ellenith called the River Ellan, which means the river of the little deer or the young deer. Anyway, thinking of Hecate and Diana Triformis, another name for Diana Triformis is Trivia, 3 ways, because there were 3 roads wherever there was a statue or whatever, you know. So from Ellenith in the centre, there would be symbolically 3 roads, one to Caernarvon, one to Carmarthen, one to Caerleon. So you've got a sovereignty goddess at the centre of the Wales with 3 tracks, 3 roads, just like Hecate, you know, similar to a triple goddess in the heart of Ireland. So in modern paganism, starting in the 1980s by an artist called Cesca Potter, the imagery of a goddess with antlers was being drawn by Cesca Potter, and then other people followed. And she got a lot of criticism back in the 1980s. People saying there's no such thing as an antlered goddess, you're just making it up, it's neo-paganism. And there's no evidence to say Ellen in the Mabinogion had antlers either. But it's such a powerful icon. And back in the 1980s, there was no internet, so it was hard to do research. But there is evidence from 3rd century Gaul of female figures with antlers. There's just one of them on the right-hand side. So that's led on to people like Caroline Wise and others doing a whole load of research into the deer goddess of Northern Europe, going right back to Siberia and ancient times and stuff. It's a big topic. But we've already looked in previous sessions how the symbols for the summertime and the symbols for the wintertime are a bull for the summertime and a stag for the wintertime. So the antlers, or the symbol of the deer, being a wild feral animal, an animal of the hunt, is the symbol of winter. So whoever the figure is on the right-hand side, there's no inscription. Some people see her as a goddess, and I do. Other people see her as a human being wearing antlers, and they see her as a kind of shaman figure, and that's fine. You know, it's a spiritual female, whether it's a shaman or a goddess, you know. But the important thing is she's wearing the horns of the wintertime. You know, so if she was a summer queen, she'd have bull's horns like Hathor. You know, she's got the horns of the wintertime. So she could easily be a kind of Nemetona midwinter goddess because she's got the winter headdress on. And another thing is, in her left hand, the way we're looking at her on the right, she's holding a great big thing called a cornucopia, which is the horn of plenty. And that comes from the star law of Capricorn. When the sun enters Capricorn, it's the winter solstice. And Capricorn literally means the goat's horn. And the stories of the goat's horn turn into the Capricorn, the horn of plenty. So there's two winter solstice symbols with this figurine on the right, the antlers of the deer of the wintertime and the Capricorn horn of plenty as well, cornucopia. Interesting. Make of it what you will. So here's another thing that was discovered this year. You know, new things keep coming out of the Ogham Grove, along with elk spirals from the Fion's window. It was an amazing discovery by somebody. The first letter of each acma in the Ogham Grove, starting at the summer solstice, and thinking of the story of Romeo and Juliet, the female is at summer solstice. The summer solstice is the queen of apples and the summertime and all the rest of it. So after the summer solstice, the first letter of the third acma is M, and the first letter of the fourth acma is A, and so on, gives you MABH, which is a version of Mav. You could say Mab or Mav, doesn't matter. B and V are interchangeable in Celtic languages. So you can have Abelo for apple or Avalo, Avalon, place of apples. So Mab or Mav is a variation of Maeve, and Maeve was the name of the sovereignty goddess of Ireland at the county of Meath, at the very centre point that every high king of Ireland had to marry. So you can have a Nemetona kind of figure at the winter solstice as she of the sacred grove, or you can have a goddess at the very center of the grove as she of the sacred grove. And you could work with that in lots of different ways, you know. So the going around the grove, the circumference of trees is the sun's ecliptic, but they're seasonal stars that come and go. Whereas directly above the grove, always there all year round, is the Queen of Heaven, Cassiopeia, Brigid, the High One, Brigantia, corresponding with whoever is there at the center of everything. For any kingdom, it's going to be the sovereignty goddess that has to be married. You know, just like the Roman emperor saying Empress of Rome to Ellen, or any would-be High King of Ireland having to marry Maeve at the Hill of Tara, and so on. So they're interesting ideas. And next year, we're going to stop working with the circumference so much. We will still go round and acknowledge the birch tree and the rowan tree and so on, and do a meditation to each tree. But after 3 years of doing PowerPoint presentations, I want a bit of time off. So we're going to use the forthcoming Oracle deck, which is primarily about esoteric ideas that you can do magically, shamanically, meditation-wise, poetically, in the center of your grove. So instead of doing the circumference, we'll be looking at things you can do in the center of your grove. And that's interesting in itself. So the first session for each acma, I'll kind of do a beginning. So like the next session is for the birch tree on the 30th of December. And at the beginning of each acma, I'll do an overview. So for the birch tree, we'll acknowledge the birch tree and I'll do an overview of the first acma and we'll talk about that. And then the following trees, we'll actually look at what's called the grove cards, and they're things to do inside the grove. And then when we get to the second acma, I'll do an overview of the second acma and so on. So we'll still be working a little bit with the circumference, but not with a PowerPoint presentation. And the meetings will be just conversational discussions about how to work with the OM in the center of your grove. And we do our meditations at the end of each session as well. So that's that. I'll stop sharing and you can put your PowerPoint, put your microphones back on. And we can talk about winter solstice and Nemetona and so on.
I have an observation that was really interesting. When you were talking about Hecate at the crossroads, because I had been taking notes during that, and I wrote down a little aside. Where is my aside? That in Santeria, in that tradition, Elegua is the god of the crossroads. And for some reason, he's the god of the crossroads and fate. Oh, I know why I wrote it down. He's in any ceremony, like when I was in Cuba, at the beginning of the rumba, which is a big ceremony. It's dances, but it's a big ceremony because all the deities are honored. Most of them are honored. Anyway, the very first one that you honor with that ceremony is Elegua, the god of the crossroads, the god of fate. He's a real trickster and he can be really scary. But I thought of that when you were talking about how Hestia and Vesta are honored at the beginning of the ceremony. And I wrote that down. And then all of a sudden, there was this goddess of the crossroads. And I thought, there's a connection somehow. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Elegua.
Here's another thing that I haven't had time to look into, but the traditional statues of Hecate, their headdresses are different. One of them usually depicts the sun, and another one has a crescent moon, and the other one has a symbol for the earth. So it's kind of like sun, moon, earth. And one way of looking at it might be that she is there for each of the three cauldrons, your lower, middle, and upper. You know, it's like a goddess that's present in all three realms. It is one way of looking at it, which would be a cauldron way of looking at it. Or, you know, within your own magical system, having union, sacred union within yourself, you would have to do it in your middle cauldron, upper cauldron, and lower cauldron. Now, these are things to explore next year.
I like the triforma I found. Well, it's on my fireplace, but I have one of your that I got in Glastonbury in '94. Yeah. So, and the triforma is sometimes interpreted, especially with graves, as Maiden Mother Crone, right? Yeah. Or it could be the three Dantians.
Yeah.
Because one has to turn in order to get inspiration or emboss from the other, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, like the chakras in yoga, you know, the three cauldrons have to be in alignment, and they all have to be well. And so there's a central axis connecting all three, as it were, your spinal cord or a pole axis to the center of the sky. So in the center of the grove, if you were standing and meditating, you want one potato, two potato, three potato, and there's a pole axis connecting the heavens to earth, running through your spinal cord. You know, these are really interesting concepts. And I want to explore ideas without creating any dogma, you know. So it's important that we're all free of dogma, because when the other world is speaking to you, there's no rules, and you mustn't be gagged by contradicting established rules. You know, that your relationship with the other world is unique to you. So that's a tricky thing. Like Franklin calls it the perilous realm, but we have to do that. You know, a dogma is a prison, you know, and we need to be mad poets as well, you know, but keep your feet on the ground. Yeah.
An Englishman.
The other world is infinite, so how can there be rules? You know?
There you go.
Yeah. But talking with friends and discussing what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and giving each other inspiration is what we should be doing around a campfire.
Yes.
Yeah.
And going after those niggling.
Manu?
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering, put it in the comments box as well. The center of the three cities, I'm pretty sure that's around a place called Elan Valley, isn't it? In Wales. So
yeah,
it's I think the clues in the name there.
That's a strange thing too, because I don't think it was done deliberately with esoteric intent, but who knows? So the River Ellen flows down into the Ellen Valley, and I think it was Victorian times. They dammed the area, made reservoirs. So there's a big, beautiful scenic area that's now called the Ellen Valley Reservoirs. But the water is siphoned by an aqueduct to Birmingham in the Midlands. So symbolically, the middle of England is receiving water from the centre of Wales. It's like a heart centre feeding water to the Midlands of England. It's strange, you know, that the goddess Ellen is kind of feeding that, you know. Nemetona is acknowledged in Bath, near Bristol. There was an inscription to her there. And just north of the Midlands, there's a town called Buxton in Derbyshire. And the old name for Buxton was Aqua Arnemisha, the waters of Nemetona. So she is acknowledged in Britain in a few different places. But some places have the root word Nemeton in, and Nemeton on its own can just mean sacred grove. So there's lots of places with kind of sacred grove in it that may or may not have been Nemetona. It's a vagary. It's like Brigid and Brigantia are not first names or Christian names as such. Like Brigid, Brigantia just means the high one or the exalted one. So it's a title of deep respect, more than a name, as it were. You know, I guess that's the same with a lot of deities. Like the Dagda just means the good God. So it's not like calling him Frank or Tom or something, you know. And Nemetona is the same. It's a title, she of the sacred grove. So I would argue that any sovereignty goddess of an area was goddess of the grove at that area. Like, what's the divine feminine of nature?
Gary, is my microphone working now?
Yes.
Or am I breaking?
No, I can hear you.
I discovered something kind of interesting while you were talking. When we were looking at the Kingdom of Ireland and the three sacred mountains where the sacred ritual of marriage took place, it was very, very compellingly looking like the Belt of Orion. So I've been experimenting with that. It's not exact, but it certainly is close enough to strike a chord, because this is one of the sky worlds. We see it in the Xi'an Pyramid of China, the Teotihuacan in Mexico, the Giza Plateau in Egypt, and it seems to be an archetypal portal between the earth and sky. and it certainly looks compellingly like that center of Ireland. So take a look at that, see what you think.
No, I keep glimpsing things and don't have time to pursue them. So the Orion's belt, Orion the Hunter, is the winter time constellation, of course. And when he's in the sky at the winter time, the three birds are below the horizon, the three birds of Rhiannon. Now, I was just thinking about Brigid, and because of Saint Brigid of Kildare, there's a tendency for people to think of Brigid as very virginal and divine and sanctified and all the rest of it. But looking at the stories of the goddess Brigid, she was a lover. She had children, you know. So she's married to Bress, the bad king. So she's a sovereignty goddess that married the king of the Tuatha De Danann, and she has a child who gets killed in the Second Battle of Moytura. The point is she had a love life. She was sexual. And there's another story that contradicts that one, where she has three sons, and they're known as the sons of Turin. And they're involved in a mythology where they are sent by Lu to go and get 3 golden apples. And to get the 3 golden apples, they each have to turn into a bird. So you've got these 3 birds grabbing these 3 golden apples. I just thought that was mad. You know, on the one hand, you've got Lu as a version of Orion hitting the bullseye, the Eye of Balor. So there's that Star Lord. And equally, you've got Brigid's sons being 3 birds. So they're the polarities. There's winter stars and summer stars. But I haven't had time to...
And one of those birds is Cygnus.
Yes.
You know, Cygnus is where the Milky Way splits. And this is where archetypally that decision is made as to whether we're going on one path to oblivion or another path to reincarnation.
Yeah. And so this is strange too. So like Cygnus kind of flies out of the cosmic vulva. If you get like the Egyptian figure of Nut, she's the star goddess, and where her legs separate, Cygnus is flying out of what they call the dark rift. It's a Sheila and the Gig type thing, you know. And in Northern Ireland, lots of the place names in English translate as Maeve's vulva. You know, these are beginnings of streams and rivers. So you think of Ellen being the river Ellan and to the Ellen Valley. So the goddess of the land watered the land, you know, and so that's with Maeve at the center of the grove as well, and all sovereignty goddesses of that. We looked last time that before the first battle of Moytura, Dagda makes love to the goddess Morrigan, and he goes to find her, and she's standing on either side of a river. You know, like the waters are throwing between her legs, and that's where he makes love to her. So there's this kind of song of the goddess of the land and flowing waters that any would-be king has to have union with. So.
Yes.
I want to bring in London.
Yes.
Where St. Paul's is, it was built on an ancient Diana temple. And flowing through London were many waterways. Unfortunately, those that would be whatever they want to call themselves decided to concrete over the Fleet River and many of the waterways of London. Now, when we go to the Thames, and we go to where the Thames comes up, she was known as the Isis, and by the side of her is an ash tree. Have you been there, Yuri? I don't know if you have or not, but there is an ash tree there. And as it flows down, it comes through and it feeds from many of the smaller rivers in my area, like the Hogs Mill and the Mole and the Beverley Brook, and there is so much going on. The other thing, sorry, I'm not 100%, I told you. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I see London as a heart, and I see the Thames like the aorta, and I see all these little rivers coming in, and the more you do work on them and clear them and bring in lovely energy, the quicker this change is going to take place, which we're all working towards at the moment. That's why a lot of us are getting ill and not feeling good and, ha, 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 and all the rest of it. The other thing I wanted to mention was, you didn't mention it this evening, but the birthing thing. I had a problem with Sheila Nagig, the ancient, and I redid the picture. I think I put it up last year, of her being lovely rather than ugly and giving birth from nature to all of life. And the waterways are the way that we actually have the energy coming in to the land for us to use. And today, so much is being done to pollute the water and to pollute the earth. And today the farmers were all up in London again. There were hundreds of tractors up there, protesting. So my point is that wherever we are on this planet, there is work that we can do, whether it's getting a new stag, a lovely white stag, or whether it's just saying really what is in your heart, which is pure love. And I think the Ogham Grove is all to do with that. It's to do with pure love and honouring each of the trees as we come round. And I see, it's interesting because I see, when I made the yew berry, the yew aril essence, I made it from the Irish, and the Irish yew is tall. And you mentioned the ancient yew in Scotland. It's the Fotheringay, is it Fotheringay or something?
Yes, yeah.
I've been there.
Perthshire.
That's the English yew, and they're very different trees to look at, because the Irish is very phallic looking, and the English yew is very spread. She kind of spreads out more, and I think that's really very interesting. The two different coming together. Anyway, that's my observations.
I could add to that, but we're running out of time. So if you put your microphones off, we'll do our meditation to the yew tree, and I'll stop recording.